go. Hi, everybody. Good day. Good evening if you're in South Africa. Good morning if you're in California. This is Dr. Bob. I'm Bob Weathers. I'm with the Vitality Project, and it's a Facebook Live event, fresh and early here in California. I am so honored to have as my guest, Cara Bear. Cara, what is your last name, Cara?
Well, what happened to Samurai Bear?
Well, I think that's even better. Samurai Bear, who has no last name. I only know you as Cara at this point. Is it Bryant? Is that right?
Cara Durand.
Durand. I'm sorry, I could not even call up your last name. Cara, known as Cara Bear, known as Samurai Bear, is here from. Do you live in Cape Town? Are you in Cape Town?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
South. Yeah. She was kind enough to invite me to join her on her program. Lockdown opened up a week ago, or 2 weeks ago. She's back to join me today, and we'll be discussing some challenging topics in the whole world of resilience and health and well-being and recovery and addiction and the things that cause us to suffer. So I'm really, really delighted to have you here. Cara, I'd love you to introduce yourself, Cara, in terms of the work that you're doing. You can certainly give a word about Rochelle and your guys' collaboration. And then I just want to just kind of freeform dialogue with you today about things that we both care about. Okay, so welcome, Cara. It's wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on your platform. It's nice to be on the other side for a change.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah. Speaking of, she's going to tell us about her platform. What is it that you've been doing these last weeks and months in South Africa? Mm-hmm.
So I started a platform called Lockdown Open Up, as you said. Originally, the idea behind it was that when South Africa came into lockdown, it was 21 days initially for us. Our restrictions were quite heavy, and they actually said that our country was one of the strictest in the world. I mean, we had alcohol. There was no alcohol, no cigarettes. We weren't even allowed to go outside and exercise at all. And those were the initial 21 days, and then it got extended. And obviously the thoughts that go into your mind as if you're someone who's dealt with, family members who are addicts and people around you who are addicts, and anxiety and depression and, mental health disorder and all that sort of thing. You think about people like that. And then you or anyone else just with, regular day in the life of starts to struggle just with everything. So I had, when we came into lockdown, sort of thought ahead about this, and I text messaged all of my friends and family and said, we're all going into this together, so let's keep in touch. And if anyone is struggling, please don't internalize it and just reach out, send a message.
Beautiful.
And I didn't really think anyone would do that, because I know that there's this sort of strange thing in South Africa where people just don't seem to like to talk about their stuff. And I used to be one of those people, and I didn't end up in a great place. But I was surprised, because I think what lockdown did was, if you hadn't dealt with your stuff before, it put a sort of magnifying glass on things. And because we had to sit with ourselves for, in this time of isolation, the stuff came out. And for some of us who have been in some form of recovery, whether it be addiction or mental health, whatever it is, or we're the family member of someone who has been in recovery, we either have the tools to deal with these things or not. So anyway, I then found that the people who I'd sent the text messages to initially started reaching out, to the point where I had to say, guys, I'm not actually qualified enough to be offering advice, or at least not solicited advice. And I actually said to Taryn, who is one of the original founders of Lockdown Open Up, and I ran this idea by her, and I jokingly said, I'm going to start a Facebook group for people to go and throw all of their stuff on there. And then I thought, well, why don't we also invite life coaches and actual qualified people who can facilitate this? And then I thought, because I love marketing, and because I have a history of well, my wonderful family and I have a sort of a background with all our wonderful issues that we've all dealt with together.
Okay.
And I thought, you know, this is sort of like everything's so aligned. And so I put together this Facebook platform, a private group that aims to provide support and upliftment to those who are left feeling vulnerable due to the COVID-19 virus, which is now all of us.
Yes.
But also to connect those people like myself and them to professional people like yourself, Bob. But also in the area, it goes further than addiction and recovery, but also in nutrition and you know, you're looking after your body again, because I think some of us all let ourselves go a little bit when we stockpiled and all the yummy stuff. Also because we couldn't exercise, we couldn't go outside. I mean, I today for the first time went hiking again, which was amazing. And that for me was my part of my own recovery, and I'll tell you about my recovery later.
Yes.
So anyway, and so this group kind of grew overnight, and a private group as well. So it's not just a page that you just follow. It takes a lot more commitment for people to, you know, commit to a private group. So yeah, it's still early days and we're still going, and obviously lockdown's not going to last forever, but I think the concept behind it is just facilitating that opportunity for people to be able to, if something's bugging you and it's manifesting inside, like to catch it early on and be able to feel that there's a safe space to go to in a social space where you can voice that, open that up and feel that you're not going to be judged or minimized. And that there's also going to be educated people. So this is where the life coaches and stuff came in. People who are educated in the field that you're talking about. And also just a comfortable, relaxed, formal environment to do this with other people like me who are also struggling in all aspects. So that's how it started.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You're so articulate. It's such a joy to have you explain what's going on. I can't imagine anybody not feeling invited. You're going to have 7 billion people join your group. I had a thought as you were talking. It didn't occur to me when we first talked, Kara, but when you just in the last paragraph or so, when you said, eventually lockdown is going to lift. It's already beginning to lift in terms of gradations or phases or whatever you call that in South Africa. They're called phases here in California. But what occurred to me is what you said earlier, whether you're from South Africa or from the US, I'm from Texas originally, and I was raised in a certain way, that there's a way that I was raised in lockdown. And I don't want to get over dramatic about this, but your title is an enduring title. It won't be phase specific, which is to say lockdown emotionally, spiritually, relationally, where we don't talk about stuff. That's going to be an ongoing, enduring issue. So I think your title is enlightened. Lockdown, open up is the antidote right there, my dear. It's beautiful. It's great. It's great.
And
really
there's
good.
so many ways that you can turn it, how lockdown opened me up. So
yes, absolutely. And as you're saying, it has for you. It has for me too. Has for so many people I've worked with. There was a research study that I think it's being done in the UK right now. It's going to be completed, I think, in July. I just read about it the other day. I've heard horror stories, and there's a lot of statistics to suggest that there's going to be a huge fallout in terms of mental health. There is ongoing a huge fallout in mental health and addiction, which is my special area of professional interest and so on. Enough so that the number of people that are dying in the US of overdoses during this time nearly equals the number of people that are dying of COVID. It's almost neck and neck. I mean, it's really tragic. So there's that. And that's not to be, that's just a huge kind of silent pandemic that's going on parallel to the overt pandemic. But there's the thing I read in the UK article, and again, it hasn't been published yet, is that what's amazing is that it's not as bad. It could be worse. It could be worse. And what they're suggesting, at least from what I read, and there'll be more to follow with this, is what you just said around lockdown, open up, is that some significant group of people are using this as an opportunity to speak to one another, open up to them, because it's really survival. If I don't have you and you don't have me, and we're left alone, we're screwed basically. And so, if what's hopeful is that there's a significant subpopulation of those that struggle. Let's just say generally with mental health issues, a subset would be addiction under that. They're using this as a springboard into connecting and opening up, whether it's with fellow people like you and what you're doing, friends, loved ones, self-help support groups. That's extraordinary. And I can't wait to see the data on that, because that's saving lives. That's saving lives. That's cash in the bank in terms of making it through this in one piece. So, yeah. So thank you. I'm bowing to you for what you're doing, Kara. Yeah.
Well,
very cool.
Thank you. It's so nice when someone like you is, know, recognizes, I mean, we're just a small, tiny little group, made, we're non-profit. We're not trying to, put in a whole bunch of money to make huge advertising or whatever. I mean, we're genuinely doing this because initially, I needed it as much as everyone else. And but I think we need more spaces to, and not necessarily just safe spaces, but social spaces as well, where it's engaging and it's interactive and it's resourceful. So there's different areas of things going on as well. So, I mean, I know that, I mean, our family, we had our stuff. We were a crazy family with a lot of dysfunction, and we will openly say that. But the one thing that was our survival sort of mechanism, and my dad always, he instilled this on us. He says, talk about your problems. And that is to this day. I mean, people think it's insane that, I mean, if you had to hear our entire life story, and I mean, I won't do that on a public platform, but I've got private support groups for that.
Sure.
But the one thing that I think I can confidently say is that being able to know that I could always go to my siblings or my dad, and with whatever it was that was bugging me, I could open up, knowing that they knew what it was that we were going through. And I think that's important, because there's a lot of people who don't. Having said that, later on in life, when you go back out into adult life, and your family is separate and stuff, you start going through your own independence or whatever it is. I mean, you and I chatted about this last time. So unfortunately, my mother, 4 years ago, we lost her to anorexia and addiction. And so our story there is, it's been a hard one. It's been a long, difficult one. But again, I'm very grateful to have had my siblings there for me. And we've all had each other to go through it. But since my mother's passing, it's been a time to sort of face inner demons and reflect on. Everyone asked me, what were you in recovery for? And it's not so much recovery. I sort of look at it now as, someone actually in the adult group the other day said it's about rediscovery. So I
love that.
I love it.
I have to tell you, I had a client in one of the treatment center groups that I lead here probably 6 months ago or so. He said the same thing. He said, we were talking about recovery. In fact, it's, that's the term that's used. And he said, Dr. Bob, he says, when you talk about recovering parts of yourself that you lost, that presupposes that you had those parts to begin with. And so he said, it wasn't even rediscovery. He says, for me, I'm moving into discovery. He said, I prefer to talk about discovery over recovery. And I thought, I'm going to steal that from you, because I think that's exactly accurate. For many of us growing up in stressful circumstances, what you're describing, what I've experienced, what virtually everybody I work with is, a lot of this work is about discovering parts of ourselves that are they're kind of dormant, but they've never been birthed. And so I love that idea of discovery or rediscovery or self-discovery. What's that? Uncovering is perfect. That works perfectly. That's great.
Because we talk about with one of the positive transformation coach, Natalie Meager, and she was saying to everyone goes in search of trying to become this person, and we go and we pick up, like we go and study something, or it's actually what we need to be doing is peeling off these layers of all the negative things that we've collected along our way, because the person is there the whole time.
That's beautiful. You remind me, you used the word earlier about professionals that come in that have educations, and it crossed my mind when you use that word, and you might be familiar with it, but it certainly is pertinent right now, is the word education derives from a Latin word, educare, and it means to draw out educare. And if you go back to the first academy, which the word academics is based on this, the first academy was in ancient Greece with Socrates. And Socrates' idea of education was he wants to evoke from you what's inside of you. He wasn't like feeding you new information. Let's get Kara and Bob to find out what's inside of them in the sense of uncovering. And so that idea of education, of educare, that's a very different approach, isn't it? And I think it's really what we're talking about. We want to become educare. We want to become drawn out to be our full Kara, our full Bob. And it's a very different vantage point, right?
That speaks to me in volumes, because
I
watched your video with Eric and his story, and about facing your inner demons.
It's so amazing, so amazing.
Speaking with authenticity.
That's
been my journey at the moment. And I posted on there just to tell him it's people like him that I'm really grateful for.
Me too. Thank you.
Because they give me hope that we can. I'm all for running towards your pain. And when I say that, I don't mean that we must all go and just, run towards our pain and suffer. What I mean is that in order to get to happiness, and I know this has got to do a lot of with the Buddhism way of thinking, but in order to get to the happiness that we also want, and that's what I want. I love happiness. Who doesn't? But we can't fake that. We've got to face our inner demons first, and we have to slay the dragon, which is what my dad says. Slay the dragon, put it in a cage, and come out the other side. We can't go around it. It's transcendence. So I'm all for that. And so with Eric's thing, with facing your inner demons and speaking with authenticity, I think this comes with where I'm going to come with shame and stigma, and speaking with freedom. Is speaking in safe spaces where we know that we can speak freely without fear of being judged or minimized, or needing to protect the feelings of others and that. So I think the best way I've learned to do that is to be selective about where you're opening up. For sure.
So we're talking about vulnerability, but it's informed vulnerability. You don't want to be naive about it. And I have been. I don't know how it's gone for you. I, like you, probably really value self-disclosure and exploration with people, and I have to be wise about it. Jesus said, "Don't cast your pearls before swine," which is a harsh saying, but what he's getting at is be careful about where you put your gold or your pearls, because some people will tromp it, and that's the image of the swine. They'll tromp it into the mud. So we have to be careful. And you've created that environment. You've created a safe community that's online, it's protected, where people can be vulnerable and trust that they're going to be respected and seen, which is beautiful. There's an image that comes to me about your father's comment about slaying the dragon, which I love. I love that. I have a lot of respect for that. The American poet Robert Bly wrote a book years ago. It's just called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. And his term in that book, he calls it eating the shadow, is his version of slaying the dragon. But there's an image, and I think I might have gotten it from that book. It's an image of the Dalai Lama. And you never know if these stories are mythic or real, but let's just say that it's realer than real. The story is that the Dalai Lama was walking down the road with a number of monks in Nepal. They're walking down the road, and all of a sudden this dog starts chasing them. He's baring his teeth. He's got foam. He's foaming at the mouth. He's like a rabid dog. Not good. And he begins chasing them, and all the monks shirk back, and Dalai Lama turns towards the rabid dog and moves towards him, and the dog backs off. The dog becomes docile. And just as an image of what you're talking about, like with your dad, if we can somehow come into relationship with the shadow, with the things that scare us most. What does Pema Chodron say? She says the places that scare us, it's like it's facing the places that scare us. If we do that, then then there's a possibility of moving through it. If we spend our lives running from it, or covering it over, or hiding it, or in my case, numbing it out and so on, there'll be no end to our suffering. So I'm right with you in that.
I think also that nothing goes away until it teaches us what we need to learn.
Beautiful.
And I learned that the hard way. After my mother died, I went into this sort of survival mode, and it started just in the days leading up to my mother's death, and trying to get into bravery mode of helping my family not have to face the death of my mother. And so after my mom died, I think in order to cover up having to face the pain of that, my coping mechanisms, which involved trying to drink it away and eat it away, and everything. I mean, and just like the addiction and stuff isn't always just substance. It's I mean, like sex, you name it, everything. I was trying everything I could to just like press it down, and not let things come up. And I did it for so long that this time last year, I found myself in the doctor's rooms weighing 110 kilograms, pre-diabetic, with a blood pressure. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the doctor had to take 3 times to check that that's what it was. And he said to me, something's got to change. And you need to change your job and whatever. And at that time, I actually was going to Adult Child and Al-Anon, but I also thought, this is a place for victims and people who don't want to take responsibility for their problems, and they want to blame their family for everything. But that was my rock bottom. And that's when I picked up the phone and I phoned one of my siblings, and I said, okay, can you take my butt up that mountain? Like, I'm ready. And that was my choice, voluntarily. Before, it was everyone, you should maybe go and go get a gym contract, or maybe you should, but I had decided, no, it was definitely time. But so, and then that was my journey to rediscover or uncover that I needed to find healthier strategies and mechanisms and methods to cope and to face my inner demons. And was not easy, but once you get through it, it's incredible, the freedom that you get to feel, and you see the world. It's almost like a paintbrush comes and paints your whole world in color. That's you just wish you'd done it before. And that's why I get so, I really feel for when I've started doing a lot of research on anorexia, which was my mom's illness, and because they talk a lot about shame, that shame is the self-shame and self-stigmatization, and that is the biggest, that is all part of the psychology there. And it makes me so sad that some people, especially with anorexia, they genuinely believe that they've got all this guilt because they believe they'll never amount to anything more than what they are. And but they also feel that they can't speak about it because of the guilt, and they need safe. That's all, again, why I started lockdown, open up, these safe spaces. We need to talk about our stuff, but we also need to make other people feel comfortable and nurtured, and that we all have this stuff. Doesn't matter what it is, and that's not to discount anyone's problem from another, but we've all got our dark demons. Some of us, it's not nice stuff, but we need to be okay. And if we see someone speaking out, if you don't agree, shush. If you don't agree, find another way to do it. But some people's stuff, it takes a lot to open. For me to say now that I walked into a doctor's room a year ago weighing 110 kilos and whatever, that's big for me. I would never have been able to do. I think this is probably the first time I've actually ever said this out loud. Anyway,
total respect, Kara. Total respect. My eyes are tearing up because I know how much courage it takes. It took me so long to be able to admit to my demons, particularly around addiction. It nearly took me out. It was just, there's so much pain in that. So that I know how difficult it is for you to do that. And when you and I can out ourselves, so to speak, where we can just be vulnerable like this, we model for others what's required is that we will die in the shadows. We have got to get this stuff out, and it requires courage like what you're doing. So I'm deeply touched, my dear. Thank you.
Well, this is the stuff that my mom never got to do.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I know that because of all the things that her and my relationship, unfortunately, I divorced my relationship with my mom about a year before she passed away, and that was my choice because again, that sadness of someone who'd kind of given up, so I couldn't walk that road anymore with her. So that was part of my guilt again, and why I was pressing down all the stuff. So it's the one thing that she did open up to me about was that she said she wanted to go and stand in front of clinics and schools naked or half naked and say to them, this is what has happened to me. In other words, like a warning, but to set herself as an example. So it's sort of like profound to me that not that I'm trying to continue her legacy, but what I'm trying to say is that she never got to open up her stuff. So I think it's very important that we make these safe spaces for people to do that. And
I think you are continuing her legacy, and that's exactly what crossed my mind right before you used those words, is that you've picked up the baton of your mother's tragic existence. And I'm so sad to hear of that. And you know enough of my story is that there's so much addiction in my family, both a nuclear and extended family, with the loss of my oldest brother, who was hugely significant to me owing to addiction. And I think of it all the time. In fact, when I talk to groups about my work in addiction and mention Tony's name, I can't not cry. It's just that deep for me. And it's, and he's not separate from me. I am him. You are your mom in terms of without consciousness, without healing, your fate, my fate, we're all in this together. I know I talked about this on your show, but I'll mention it for anybody that's listening. And there's a statistic that's come out of the news in the last week or two since I talked to you that I don't think I discussed, is that 1 out of 4 Americans, I would assume this is the same in South Africa, I don't assume it's different, 1 out of 4 Americans over the age of 12 are clinically addicted to substance when you include alcohol, nicotine, and then the other mood-altering drugs, the opiates, methamphetamine, and so on. So it's 1 out of 4, which is 80 million Americans. That's a significant number of people, but that's not nearly as mind-blowing as how many of us have what you were talking about a minute ago, which in terms of behavioral addictions, all of the non-substance addictions, psychology calls them process addictions, Kara. 90% of Americans will say they have at least one behavioral or non-substance addiction right now. And that may well be in addition to alcohol, other drugs. It's just that the behavioral addictions are virtually universal. In fact, as I shared with you, when I ask groups, what about the 10% that say they're not addicted? The groups that I speak to say they're lying. And I go, and why would they lie? And it gets right back to what you and I've talked about. There's such horrible shame and stigma about admitting that I'm addicted to sex, or I'm addicted to gambling, or I'm addicted to eating, or whatever like that. We don't talk about that. Your mom wasn't alone in that. We don't talk about this. As I shared with you, 2/3 of people have addiction to substance in their family of origin. So in a family of 4, just statistically, 2/3 of people are going to have somebody who's addicted there. But here's the worst part, and we talked about this, 2/3 of people will not talk to anybody outside of the family of origin about it. In your family, which I bless your family if they're listening, for your father and for your siblings, for being open to talk with you in the ways that they have, it's extraordinary. That's really a blessing. That's so much the exception to the rule in terms of my work. Most people I work with don't have any family members with whom they can talk frankly and vulnerably. And so, so those 2/3 of people that can't talk outside the family, you're lucky if you have a family you can. If you can't, then you're really stuck. And that's where what you're doing, Kara, comes in, and all the work that's being done in various recovery support groups and so on. Let me mention one other statistic, then I want to come back to you. Since we've spoken, generally the statistics around clinical anxiety disorders is around 10%, the prevalence, give or take, and the same with depression. And there's a 2/3 overlap between anxiety and depression. 2/3 of people that have a clinical diagnosis of anxiety have a clinical diagnosis of depression. They're way, they call them co-occurring disorders. I just read a statistic from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control here in the US in the last week, that has ballooned in the last 3 months up to 30%. 30% of Americans have clinical anxiety right now. And I'm going to assume, just by inference, that 30% have depression. And so now what we're talking about means there's a whole bunch of people out there that are suffering hugely in terms of the long-term effects of kind of sustained stress like this. And if it doesn't manifest as substance addiction, or doesn't manifest as behavioral addiction, it's manifesting as anxiety, it's manifesting as depression, it's manifesting as PTSD, it's manifesting as attentional disorders. And so it makes all the more imperative everything that you're doing, Kara.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand that. I think, well, as far as addiction goes, I think I think there's a lot more people who have addiction than anyone thinks. I think everyone has it in one way or another.
Yeah,
and if you
the
don't,
point. Yeah.
you're a support staff member of someone who does.
Yeah.
And those people, I think also we need to start making more awareness of those people, because they also have shame. I remember, and I grew up in an addict household where I went to bed every night wondering the next morning when I woke up, who was going to be alive still, which parent was going to, die first. And that's the reality of it. And that's something that, then you go wake up the next day and then you go to work or to school and you've got to put on a normal face and a brave face. And when you live the majority of your adult life like that as well, and you have those unhealthy coping mechanisms, eventually you get to a point where you can't, it's like a boil, and the boil, eventually it explodes because your body can't take that anymore. And those coping mechanisms, they don't work. So you've got to deal with it at some point. And that's why Taryn yesterday said to me, she gave me a phone call and she said, Bear, it's like the whole world has gone batshit crazy. I was like, well, yes, it has. And are we surprised? Because all of our problems have been put under a magnifying glass, and now with COVID and everyone expressing themselves and their problems that they haven't been able to, that haven't been felt as before, we're using this now as a sounding board. So COVID-19, and I'm not discounting that it is a real problem, but it's almost like the catalyst for all the other existing problems. And now we're acting this out, and good, we should, because we need to talk about this stuff. But
Thank you.
Let it be a lesson, because, and this is the real thing that I've been trying to drive home. If you have a problem, no matter what it is, if it's feeling not nice inside, pick up the phone or get onto the internet, find someone, but someone educated or whatever, and speak out, get help. Don't let it sit there, because
here, right on.
Yeah.
I was reflecting. This morning. I was thinking about growing up. I think I was a very sensitive boy. And I hid that because it's not cool to be very sensitive, sensitive to emotions, sensitive to beauty, to nature, to suffering, all of that stuff. My daughter, Amanda.
No. I love the sensitive boys. No,
Thank you.
So much better than the ego. No.
Thank you. I was thinking of it this morning, and you just gave me this image. By the way, I want to make sure to mention the video that you sent to me yesterday. I can't remember the gentleman's name because he used that same image of a boil. But I was thinking this morning, and this is an embarrassing thing for me to admit, but it's just how it goes with the territory. When I hit adolescence, I broke out in really severe acne, and it was so shameful to me. There I am on the cusp of beginning to, be attracted to girls, wanting to connect with girls, and I've got the term for it is acne vulgaris. I mean, vulgaris. It was vulgar is what it was. And you know what it was? Is it was a manifestation of all the shit that had never been dealt with for me. And I never had any conscious awareness of it. I wanted to fix my acne. And it was the boils, literally the boils, and all that's so gross about that. It was their manifestation. And what I was thinking this morning is that very sensitive boy, by the time I hit adolescence, it's kind of like you were saying in your own life, my skin could not contain me anymore. It began to just break out, and it continued to be broken out throughout adolescence. I've got to be one of the only people on the planet that when Accutane came out, which was well into my, deep into my 20s, I think at the point that I went in for treatment with Accutane, which was to somehow correct the genetics of my situation, the doctor said, you're the only person I've ever met that had to have 2 complete Accutane treatments to get my skin under somewhat control. I'm 65 and I still break out, my dear. It's like I am so sensitive to emotions inside or outside. And whether it's that or an eating disorder, God bless your mother, or some other addictive disorder or depression, I certainly know depression, anxiety, and so on like that, we're all vulnerable to this stuff. And if we can find some way to express it, I had no tools for that. No tools for that, Kara. Let me tell you a story. When I started graduate school 40 years ago, and I had dear friends throughout graduate school, and some of them are still my dear friends. I had this guilty feeling always. They could talk about their shit. They could talk about their darkness, and I loved them for that. I never judged them for that, but I was so aware. It was a very hidden thing for me. I couldn't reciprocate. I couldn't do it. And I always
Yeah.
felt like such a loser, kind of a poser. And it took me getting into recovery to begin to be able to talk about zits and alcohol. I couldn't talk about any of that
I was
ever.
exactly the same. I mean, Taryn will tell you when she first met me, Taryn met me 10 years ago. I
Yeah.
couldn't look people in the eyes.
Mm.
I could not be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Intimacy was
Yeah.
I could not be intimate with someone.
No, well, you can't.
I was so detached from myself. Because I'd learned that the only way to cope with the trauma that was going on around me and with the guilt that I felt from divorcing my relationship with my mom and various other things was to disassociate with myself completely.
Yes.
Terrible. But I'm sure lots of other people will relate as well, maybe other people in recovery. But but also what happens, what I was going to say, apart from the aftermath of not dealing with your things properly, apart from it being about the other side effects, there's also things like, I was actually talking to my grandparents about this the other day. The reason why I'm so like trying to drive this home is that later on, if we haven't dealt with stuff in our older age, with our bodies not being able to cope with our inside stuff, there's things like cancer and heart attacks and there's those things. And then obviously you look at the now variables like job loss and those kinds of things, and you're affecting your relationships and that. But everything now, I think it's sort of, you have to look at it that it's all a direct result of that we're not dealing with our stuff and we're not.
I remember I was out of graduate school and teaching in a graduate school when the field began to grow. And it was a new term, psychoneuroimmunology. There was no field of that, and it was the field of what you're talking about. It's now become, it's part and parcel of training in medicine, part and parcel of training in psychology at this point, is to realize that our psyches are so tied into our neurobiology, and our immune systems are tied into both. And if we don't attend to body, mind, and spirit responsibly, there'll be a breakdown. There'll be a systemic breakdown. For me, honestly, early on, it was my skin. I mean, I used to tell people my skin is my most vulnerable organ. Some people get ulcers, some people get, however that can go. I got zits. That was my skin. And the sad part about it is I couldn't hide that. I couldn't put clothes over it. It was like there. And so how painful was that? But I think it was like begging to get my attention. And when that didn't work, then eventually addiction began to creep in. And for me, addiction really peaked in midlife. And it was like, we're going to get your attention one way or the other. Yeah, and it did. I had a supervisor that said to me, because I had some monumental screw ups in my career that basically torpedoed my career. She said, Bob, I've heard of people getting hit by lightning once, which is very rare. You've been hit by lightning twice. And I think it took a lot to get through my thick skull, and I don't want to throw myself under the bus or you under the bus. Denial runs deeply. In fact, I don't like using denial as a club. It's like, it's self-protection. It's self-protection. The fact is it'll kill us. It'll kill us if we're not careful.
Yeah. It's unfortunately your secrets keep you sick. And that's I hated people saying that because it suddenly made me feel guilty. But I think everyone in my family knows that as well. And what's been quite beautiful about me speaking out, and there's certain things I can and can't say on a public platform, but but I have been, my grandparents, so my mother's parents, have been watching every video, and they're
hello to them.
And hi, Grandma.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So they've been watching all my videos, and they're quite, of the generation where you also, I think most grandparents, my age grandparents, or people who identify with this, we're not very great at talking about our stuff like, but they phoned me the other night, and we for the first time had a really open conversation about my mom and stuff that we haven't before.
That's remarkable. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and to me, I was like, if there's anything that's come from this group that I've started, it's that. And also, stuff that they're behind me 100% and whatever. So that was beautiful. And yeah, that's the other thing is older generations, I think, also talking about family problems was not a thing. I think Rochelle mentioned that in our last in our last chat with you, Bob, that's it's a generational thing. And
say more about that to remind me of it, because I want to remember what Rochelle said. Yeah.
Rochelle said that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she asked you or Guy about with different generations, that our generation is probably better or more exposed to talking about stuff than our parents, and more so our grandparents.
Yeah, for sure.
So my grandparents are in their 80s. Sorry, Grand and Grandpa, they're in their 80s. But yeah, and that things were quite well hidden because it just, you don't talk about that stuff at the dinner table or with, you know, and now there's more people going to AA and NA and talking about it, because let's face it, especially now with COVID-19, and you know, everyone's speaking out, and good, because we all have problems, and we probably all have addiction in one way or another, and we need to talk about it, because otherwise everyone's just going to die off of, you know, problems that manifest.
I had a thought this, I've had I can't remember if it was this morning. I was up at 5 a.m. this morning. I have quiet time in the morning. And so I woke up a little bit earlier this morning. I got up and had a couple of hours of quiet time, some reading and reflection. And there was a passage out of the poet Rumi that came to mind. It's just a single line that came to my mind, but I'm well familiar with it, and I've visited it many times, but it came in a different way, and it's informed by our talking. He says, many demolitions are actually renovations. Ooh. And I was just letting that sink in, because what I was aware of was the demolition in my own life that came in midlife, where I lost a successful career as a professor, as a psychologist. I lost all of that. I lost relationships, I lost reputation, certainly lost finances, opportunity, all of that. And it nearly killed me. It nearly killed me. And I was thinking of it, but I just stayed with it, Kara. And what I was aware of is that if it weren't for all those demolitions, and I wouldn't wish them on anybody, and I wouldn't wish them on especially those that are nearest to me, because it caused a tremendous amount of suffering for those that are nearest to me, not the least of which is myself. I was just thinking of all the things that wouldn't have opened up for me. And it's really mind-blowing. I don't know if I can say this without crying. I'm just aware that what I learned through, as you said earlier, your own hitting bottom, what I've learned has changed my life in a way that I would have had a fine career. It would have been fine. I don't think that was what I was meant to have. I don't think I was meant to have a fine career. I think I was meant to have my ass handed to me in a way that was tragic and extreme, in order for me to wake up in a depth that I would not have woken up otherwise. And I'm not going to go down the list right now, but I'm just aware of so many resources that are directly related. People that I've known, meeting you. The last 10 years are completely a function of having screwed up the previous 15 years to just a royal level. And there's no excuses for that. I take full responsibility for that. But I am so grateful to grace, however somebody understands that, for the demolitions, because they've led to renovations in my life that I wouldn't go back. I think about this often. I would not go back to where I was before. I would like to spare others, not the least of which is myself, the suffering of that. But if it was required to be who I am today, sitting here with you, then it's a bargain. It is a bargain. I swear to God, I believe that.
I have goosebumps. It's like, I mean, it's that whole Carl Jung, his whole theory on, you know, neuroses, and you know that yeah, it's horrible. Pain and suffering is not nice, but it is also what renews us eventually, and brings us to that place of eternal happiness, if we can face it and get through it, whereas a lot of people won't, and they'll try and run around it, or they'll press it down, but it's always going to keep coming back, and every time it comes back, it can bite harder each time as well. And then yeah, unfortunately we do end up sacrificing other people, but I really resonate with that. Every time, some of the hardest things that I've been through, eventually when you do face it, and it's not nice, and sometimes you don't understand, like, why is this happening, and you don't want to go through that. I never understood why some of the things happened to my family the way they did, And I'm not saying that that's the reason at their expense why anyone's happy now, but I do look at things sometimes. I look at my dad and how he's, the way he's turned his life around. And as I said, this is what gives me hope. People like Eric and my dad who speak about facing their demons and what they did to get through that, not around it. And when they speak about it with authenticity, and it's the reason why I'm in recovery of my own. And yeah, it's that's some
I have
stuff.
such a strong feeling. We're going to wrap up in about the next 5 minutes, if that's okay with you. I want to make sure that we make connections to the work you're doing for anybody that's viewing this that doesn't know how to connect with you. I want to say this to you, Kara. It's really quite extraordinary. It came to me about 5 minutes ago. Isn't it a trip to you that you and I are across an ocean and hemispheres and all of that? I've never met you. I hope one day I'll meet you in the flesh. You live in the same town as a very dear friend of mine, Guy Duplessis, and you know Guy, he's been on your program. But what's extraordinary to me is I feel deeply kin to you, as you do to anybody, as we do to anybody that is willing to risk what we're talking about. It's really quite extraordinary. You can speak a different language. We speak the same language, as it turns out, but there's a way that it's not required, doesn't require language, doesn't require culture, doesn't require gender, doesn't require race, doesn't require religion, any of that. The connection is so powerful. It's really quite extraordinary to me. So I'm having a living mystical experience of how deeply connected I feel to your narrative and your heart, even as we're speaking. And this is the second time we've met. It's really quite miraculous to me, I have to say.
Yeah, I think everything is aligned. Yeah, when it comes to the stuff, because we've both, I think, maybe experienced this thing of authenticity and having, there's a connection there. So I'm really grateful. Thank you.
There's a poem that is another favorite of mine. This happens to be by the same poet. He's a 13th century poet, the Persian poet Rumi. I love this, and I'll just share it with you because it's a way to express how I feel connected to you, and it's right with what you just said. He says, "How to cure bad water." So let's look at you and me as having been immersed in bad water. How to cure bad water? He says, send it back to the river. He says, there's a secret medicine. There's a secret medicine that's given only to those who hurt so hard that they give up hope. And then he says, the hopers would feel slighted if they knew. The idea there is not hopelessness. It's that you have to be willing to face the demons the way that you and I are talking today, to break on through to the other side. It's almost like there's the initial way that we think of hope, which is, I'm just going to hope that shit goes away. Like that. And he says, no, he says, those hopers will feel slighted if they realize that you have to hurt so hard that to break on through to the other side to get that secret medicine. And that's what I experienced with you. I experienced the secret medicine with you.
That's lovely. I just think of I think of other people as well who've been through it, and then that's again the hope thing. It's worth going through.
Let me say a word about this just real briefly. You were talking earlier about your literal family, and it's been such an incredible blessing. And I do bow to your grandparents, your father, your siblings who have had the courage to whatever extent to move through this together as consciously as possible. That's the best we can all do. And it's wonderful that you have that in your literal family. And when we can have that in our families, it's an enormous blessing. But just to be clear is that for many of us on this planet, that's not been given to us in our blood families. And so we have to find our soul or our spiritual families, however you understand that. And very early on for me, in addition to my literal family, I had teachers that became honorary mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And that's continued in my life. And I think that's what you're talking about, is you're cultivating a community where that's what you have in lockdown open up. Yeah. It's like you can choose your own parents. You can choose your own family at a certain age in your life. Early on, very difficult to do. We're very dependent. But when we become independent enough to do that and to do that intentionally, what a grace that is, right?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There were times where we weren't all perfect, But and then you do have other people to fall back on as your, I call them my adopted families.
I like that. That's perfect. That's perfect.
And you do
Adopted
need
family.
those people. You can't always go to your family members about your family problems. So I've got my adult child family, and then I've got my Al-Anon family, and then I've got
perfect,
so and that's
perfect. Wonderful. What can we do, Kara, to connect people with your resources, assuming that you are willing for people to join from this side of the ocean? I don't know. How can people find you?
So we are only on Facebook. We don't have a website. I like to keep it on Facebook. It's just more simple that way. It's a Facebook private group, and people can join there. The only conditions are that people obviously respect people's privacy on there, but also this exact destigmatization is a big thing there. So that means that we want people to be able to, if they are involved in a group chat or commenting or something and you don't agree, don't minimize that. It's in one of our rules now. And yeah, if you do have an issue with something that someone says, then address it with admin, and we'll have a chat about it. And we will, if it's something, because I'm not an expert, I will run it by a life coach that I think is relevant to the issue at hand. And yeah, so if people do want to support us and have, a new sort of niche life coach focus field that they think would help out. We're trying to grow to make it as all-inclusive as possible. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment. So as I said, we just started out with lockdown, and we're going to grow past lockdown so that it becomes to facilitate people as they go back out into the new normal. And yeah, it's just to connect with more people like yourself. And
wonderful. It's wonderful. I heartily endorse all that you're doing. And I want anybody who's seeing this, anybody who's been connected with the Vitality Project, to please explore what it is that you're doing with Taryn and with Rochelle and with your team in South Africa. It feels really in the same spirit. I feel like we're sister organizations. What we're trying to attempt here in the Vitality Project and what you're accomplishing is very much in sync spiritually. Another piece I want to mention is, owing to the limitations of technology, neither Kara nor I have been able to respond in real time to any comments that you might have added to our chat or our comment section. And we'll do that after the fact. And so please, any questions, comments, further questions for Kara, if you want to reach out to her, ask specific questions, find out more resources, really invite you to do that. And we'll be addressing that these next 24 hours or so. We'll get back to everybody who is here. Any final word from you for today, Kara? Anything you want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, just I'm really, what I said about everything being aligned, is, I think, definitely, I don't say that loosely, and with that I mean this topic of speaking out and not feeling, if there's anything that someone feels is embarrassing or that someone might judge them for opening up about, find someone who is educated or has gone through what it is you need to speak about, and open up with that person and stick to that person. That's, I don't know why I just feel I need to say that, because that's been on my mind a lot lately. When I had to open up about my personal stuff, I sort of started opening up to the wrong people, and it opens up it facilitates people challenging you. So I would find your safe spaces so that you can always go back when you're feeling really vulnerable. Don't open up to family members about family member problems, and be selective about things, and just know that it's fine to have problems. We all have problems. Easier said than done, I know, but it's the only way the world is going to change is if we start addressing our problems and dealing with them, and telling other people and educating other people that it's okay to talk about our problems. This needs to be okay. This what we're doing now, it's not working.
You remind me, I had a professor in graduate school who wrote a book, or no, he actually riffed off of a book that was out at the time, and he said, I'm not okay, you're not okay, but that's okay. And it's just the idea that we're all suffering, we're all struggling, and it's okay if we can share with one another. That's where the healing is. It's been beautiful, beautiful, beautiful to have this luxury to spend an hour with you. It's wonderful, Kara. Let me know any other ways I can support you. Thank you so much, really.
Thank you.
So many
Thank you
blessings.
so
Yeah.
much.
Be well. Have a good weekend. Okay. Take good care. Give my love to Rochelle, to Guy when you speak to him. Okay. And we'll speak again soon. Thanks again,
Yeah.
Kara. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye bye.